Elodie Hale. That's the name on the door of the company I built from the ground up, the company that recently sold for $68 million. And while it feels surreal to say it out loud, it's the truth. But none of this was handed to me. Everything I've achieved, everything I've built, came from my own blood, sweat, and countless sleepless nights. I didn't have a trust fund or a well-connected family to help me rise. All I had was the drive to prove everyone wrong. The story I'm about to tell you isn't just about business success. It's about the price of family, the guilt that comes with it, and the ultimate breaking point where you realize that no matter how hard you work, some people will never see you for who you are. They'll see you as an ATM, a source of financial support, someone to drain until there's nothing left. But what happens when that machine finally says insufficient funds? That's what happened to me. And when it did, I walked away. Not just from my family, but from the constant emotional weight they placed on me, asking for more and more, never recognizing the sacrifices I'd made or how much I'd already given. The girl they used to laugh at, the one who slept in her car to finish college, is not the same woman sitting here today. Let me take you back to Madison, Wisconsin, where this all started. Growing up in Madison, I always knew the house wasn't really mine. It was my brother's. Bronson, Hale, everyone's golden boy. From the moment I could remember, it felt like everything in the house revolved around him. My father worked long hours as an electrician, often coming home after dark, but no matter how tired he was, he would always find the energy to drive Bronson to his hockey practice, braving the harsh Wisconsin winters. Meanwhile, I was left to fend for myself. My mother worked at a local credit union, always proudly boasting about how well Bronson was doing in school, while my report cards were buried in a drawer, forgotten. Bronson was the star, and I was the afterthought. For him, things came easily. He was always the one with new hockey gear, new cars, and endless support. He didn't have to work hard for anything. But for me, it was different. The moment I mentioned computers, coding, or anything related to technology, my father would scoff. "Girls don't need to worry about that nonsense." He'd say, "You should focus on something more practical, like nursing or teaching." My mother would nod, agreeing, saying that too many big dreams would only lead to disappointment. From the beginning, it was clear. Bronson could dream big, but I was expected to play it small. By the time I hit high school, the frustration had built up. I was the one studying on secondhand laptops, scraping together birthday money from relatives just to afford basic software to teach myself HTML. Meanwhile, Bronson was getting new skates, new sticks, and private coaching. His dreams were always funded, while mine were ignored. But I wasn't going to let that stop me. I applied for every scholarship I could find, working to prove to myself and to them that I wasn't just some girl who'd settle for a small life. When I finally got accepted to the state university, I was thrilled. But the excitement quickly faded when my mom asked, "How are you going to pay for this?" My dad didn't even ask. He simply said, "You're smart enough to figure it out." And so I did. I took jobs that no one else wanted, waitressing at a diner, cleaning offices at the engineering building, tutoring freshmen on weekends. I worked 70 hours a week just to scrape by. When the dorms closed for the holidays, I slept in my car, in the library parking lot, with the engine running for heat. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. But of course, when I would return home for the rare weekend, the questions never stopped. Why are you working yourself to death? Why can't you pick something easier, like nursing or teaching? And the worst one of all, why can't you be happy like Bronson? Bronson, who was wrecking his trucks and jumping between dead-end jobs, was the standard of success in my family. I was the one who was always too much, working too hard, dreaming too big. I was always reminded that my dreams were too lofty and unrealistic. Mom once found my class schedule on the back of a diner receipt, and I could hear her muttering to Dad, "This is why people think we're trash," loud enough for me to hear. Dad didn't even react. He just handed Bronson another $20 for gas. That was the moment it hit me. I was never going to get their approval. I was never going to be the daughter they wanted me to be. So, I stopped coming home. I answered their calls only when absolutely necessary. And the few times I did visit, it was always the same. They'd offer empty words of support, only to follow them up with demands for money or guilt trips about how hard they worked to raise me. But that wasn't the reality of my upbringing. The last time I walked out of that house, Bronson was 22, still living rent-free in the basement, and I was 24, drowning in $40,000 of student loans. with no real place to call home. They looked at me, standing there with a duffel bag of laundry, and said, "You look tired. Maybe it's time you gave up this computer nonsense and come home." I smiled, told them I had an early shift, and left. That was the day I decided that the next time they saw me, it would be on my terms. So, I left. I left Madison and moved to Austin, Texas, with only 2 suitcases and my beat-up Civic. The city was different from Wisconsin. It was full of life, full of people building things, and it felt like I had a shot at something bigger. I rented the cheapest studio I could find, a tiny 600 square foot apartment above a laundromat, and I got to work. The routine never changed. I coded during the day, worked nights, bartending when the money ran low, and crashed for 4 hours before starting it all again. And then, one day, the idea that would change everything came to me. It wasn't easy, not even close. But every hour I spent building my business was one step closer to something bigger, something that didn't come with the weight of my family's expectations. I still remember the late nights, the endless cups of coffee, and the relentless grind. The first 2 years in Austin were a blur. I was alone in a city that buzzed with ambition, yet I still felt the sting of isolation. But there was a fire in me that refused to die. I had dreams, big ones. And for the first time in my life, I was determined to make them happen without anyone's help. I didn't have a mentor. I didn't have a team. It was just me, my laptop, and a shared workspace with other aspiring entrepreneurs who, like me, were doing whatever it took to make their mark. But that's when I had my breakthrough. I built a simple tool, a real estate price prediction model. It wasn't groundbreaking at first, just something I created to help local agents guess the value of properties faster and more accurately than their human counterparts. But it was clean, efficient, and powerful. And it worked. Soon, I shared it at a local tech meetup, and Dr. Patricia Klein, my old computer science professor, saw its potential. She was the one who had been there for me when no one else had believed in my abilities, always encouraging me to dream bigger. And she did more than just offer words of support. When she saw what I had built, she sent me $75,000 in a single email. It was the first real investment I ever received. "You're not just building something small," she wrote. "Don't waste this." With that money, everything changed. The first thing I did was buy servers, real office space, and upgrade the one thing that made the whole operation possible: my desk. I remember the first day I had a real desk in a real office. It felt surreal. Suddenly, I wasn't just scraping by. I was part of something bigger, something that could actually make a difference in the real estate world. Then came Crosby Vaughn, a sharp developer I met at a local meetup. He had been working in a corporate job and wasn't satisfied with his life. After hearing my pitch and seeing the product I'd built, he quit his job and joined me. We were a team, and together we made something that was about to turn heads. But in the beginning, it wasn't easy. We worked from that tiny studio apartment above the laundromat, taking turns sleeping on the floor when deadlines hit. We didn't have time to go out. We barely had time to eat. We just coded, worked, and built. I remember the first 12 users we had. We celebrated like we'd won a championship. But when we started seeking investors, I realized just how far we still had to go. For a while, it felt like nobody took us seriously. We had no revenue, no press coverage, just an idea and a ton of hustle. But then things started to shift. First came the $100,000 investment, then $1 million. The more we refined the product, the more people noticed. We went from 0 to 100, quietly at first, but then all at once. Agents across Texas started paying us to tell them how much houses were worth before they even listed them. It was a game changer. But still, I stayed hidden. I didn't want my name or face attached to the company. I wanted to stay in the background. It was safer that way. For all I knew, I could still be the girl they all laughed at, the one who left Madison chasing internet nonsense. My parents, back in Wisconsin, had no idea. To them, I was still the stubborn daughter who disappeared to chase something that would never work. They had no idea that I was on the verge of something much bigger than they could ever comprehend. As the business grew, I remained the mystery. Every press release went out with my name nowhere to be found. The world saw us as a tech startup with a killer product, but they had no idea who was pulling the strings behind the scenes. My parents would leave me voicemails, occasionally asking if I had found a husband yet or if I was okay, but the truth was, I had stopped caring about their approval. I had learned to live without them, without the constant reminders of how little they believed in me. The only person who ever checked in on me without an agenda was Lakeland Hale, my cousin. She was a lawyer specializing in debt collection and foreclosure cases, and whenever I'd vent about being broke, she would laugh and say, "One day, you'll be the one collecting." Little did I know, her words would turn out to be prophetic. Then, the call came. It was my mother. At first, I didn't want to answer. I had deleted her number years ago. But there was something about the number on the screen that pulled me in. Maybe I was hoping for an apology, some recognition that I had made it on my own, that I was not the person they'd tried to mold me into. But there was no apology. There was no recognition. There was only panic. Her voice cracked the moment she heard me pick up. And then, in a breathless, sobbing whisper, she told me everything. They were in debt. $320,000 in debt. The bank was about to take the house. They had made bad investments, and it was all falling apart. But it wasn't just about the money. The guilt trip came soon after. "You wouldn't be anything without us," my mom sobbed. "You owe us, Elodie. After everything we did for you, you need to help." Then Truett, my brother, joined the call, offering me the same line. "You have to fix this. You owe us. We sacrificed so much for you to be where you are." The weight of their words crushed me. All the resentment, all the years of feeling like I didn't matter, suddenly surged back. But this time, I had something they didn't know about. I had the power to make decisions. I had control. I could end this cycle. I could make sure that the next time they came asking, it wouldn't be for a handout. It would be for them to answer for their own actions. But first, I had to decide what to do next. The moment I hung up the phone, a heavy silence settled over me. I stared at my phone, trying to process what had just happened. My parents, the same ones who had dismissed my dreams and made me feel like I was never good enough, were now desperate. But more than that, they were making it clear that they expected me to bail them out, as if my success was somehow owed to them. I could feel the old guilt creeping in, the same guilt that had followed me my entire life. "You owe them, Elodie. They sacrificed so much for you. It's time to give back." Those words echoed in my mind, twisting around my resolve. But this time, I wasn't going to be the one who caved in. For years, I had given them everything. I had my time, my effort, my dreams. Every time they called, every time they needed money, I gave. I paid the price for their mistakes, for their dismissive behavior, and for their inability to see me for what I had become. And yet, here they were, asking for more. I couldn't do it. I couldn't keep repeating the same cycle of sacrificing my hard-earned success for their inability to take responsibility. But I also couldn't just ignore them, could I? Not when they were facing foreclosure, not when they were staring down the barrel of losing everything they had. I'd been taught to protect my family, to help them when they were in need. But the problem was, they didn't see me as family anymore. They saw me as a safety net, as their backup plan, the one they could rely on when things went wrong. And that wasn't fair. I had worked too hard, fought too many battles on my own to be the one to clean up their mess. I needed to stop being their ATM. I needed to put my foot down. I reached out to Lakeland immediately. She was the only person who had never made me feel like a failure. She understood what it was like to be on the receiving end of the blame, to be the one expected to fix everything. And unlike my parents, she didn't see me as a resource. She saw me as family, someone worth supporting without any agenda. "I'm done," I told her over the phone, my voice steady despite the storm swirling in my chest. "I'm done with the guilt. I'm done with the manipulation. I can't keep bailing them out every time they screw up." Lakeland was quiet for a long moment, but I could hear the understanding in her silence. Then she spoke. "We have to make sure they don't have a choice anymore." I knew what she meant. I wasn't going to hand them the money. That was the old way of doing things. I wasn't going to fix their problems anymore. This time, I was going to make them face the consequences of their actions. But I needed to do it in a way that would protect me from their constant demands. Lakeland, a lawyer specializing in debt collection and foreclosure cases, knew how to handle situations like this. She had a reputation for taking on clients with unmanageable debt and making things happen. If there was anyone who could help me navigate this nightmare, it was her. It didn't take long before we had a plan in place. We would take control of the situation, but not in the way my parents expected. I contacted my lawyer to create a new LLC, a Delaware-based company that would handle the business transaction quietly without raising any suspicion. I needed to be anonymous. No one, least of all my parents, could know I was behind this. I would use the LLC to purchase the debt, which would allow me to take ownership of the house without directly involving myself in the process. Lakeland started working with her contacts in the banking industry to buy the $320,000 debt at a steep discount. The plan was risky, but it was the only way to take control of the situation. I would own the debt, and once the foreclosure process was underway, I could legally make sure my family faced the consequences of their reckless decisions. The home they had taken for granted, the home that had once been the center of their manipulation, would no longer be theirs. The hardest part wasn't making the decision. It wasn't even wiring the money to purchase the debt. The hardest part was the phone call I had to make afterward. My parents had already been calling me nonstop, their voices growing more desperate with each message. But I knew if I answered, they would try to guilt me into paying them directly. They would twist the truth to make it seem like I was the villain, the one who abandoned them when they needed me most. So instead of answering their calls, I let the silence do the talking. I forwarded the voicemails to Lakeland. She was the one who had the legal power to handle this. She was the one who could make sure the process played out according to the law. The day the money was wired, everything changed. Lakeland worked behind the scenes, ensuring that every step of the process was handled properly. By the time the funds were transferred and the debt was officially purchased, the wheels were in motion. My family had no idea that everything they had was already in someone else's hands, that the game had already changed. The weight of what I had done didn't settle in until weeks later. It was the morning of the eviction, cold and gray, with that biting Wisconsin wind I'd grown up with. I'd heard about the process before, but nothing could prepare me for seeing it happen to my own family. The call came in, and I didn't hesitate. It was time. The house, once so full of my parents' pride and Bronson's teenage dreams, was now the scene of their downfall. Lakeland had ensured everything was done by the book, the LLC was officially the new owner of the mortgage, and everything had been handled legally. The paperwork had been filed, the demands had been made, and now it was time for them to face the consequences. The day before the eviction, I sat alone in my Austin home, a quiet house that felt like a new beginning. The weight of the years, the emotional baggage, and the constant pressure to help my family had lifted. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I could breathe. There was nothing more I needed to do, nothing more I could give. I had done what was necessary, and now I would let the chips fall where they may. But that night, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Lakeland. The deadline has passed. The house is officially being foreclosed on tomorrow. It's all over. I put the phone down, took a deep breath, and stared out the window at the quiet street. For years, I'd been waiting for this moment, not for the satisfaction of seeing my family lose their home, but for the sense of relief that came with breaking free from their manipulation. The house they thought they owned, the home they had always used to guilt me into submission, was now out of their hands, and they would have to rebuild, just like I did. The eviction day arrived, and everything unfolded exactly as planned. It was cold outside, the kind of cold that cuts through you like a blade. I could picture my parents standing in that house, the place that had been their sanctuary, now teetering on the brink of collapse. They were still there, waiting for the sheriff's deputy, waiting for the moment they realized they were no longer in control. I couldn't make myself go back to Madison. I couldn't walk into that house and face the people who had never once apologized for the pain they caused me. Instead, I stayed in Austin, focusing on my work, on my life, and on the new chapter I was finally ready to begin. But the news came quickly. The house had been emptied, the auction had been set. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, looking at my phone, and reading the message from Lakeland. The house sold for $198,000, less than half its original value. There was no joy in the news. It was just an ending. The house that once held so many memories, some good, most bad, was no longer in my family's hands. As I had anticipated, the fallout from the foreclosure didn't stop with just my parents. Truett, my brother, went into full meltdown mode. He had always believed that he could always rely on me to fix his mistakes, that somehow, despite everything he'd done, I would come to his rescue. But I hadn't. The moment the eviction went through, he started sending texts, calling me names, threatening me with everything from lawsuits to public humiliation. He didn't understand. No, he refused to understand that I was no longer the girl who cowered in the corner begging for his approval. He would never understand that the person I had become wasn't the same as the one he tried to manipulate. A few weeks passed, and my parents went silent. The messages from Truett continued angry rants about how I was heartless, how I was destroying the family, how I was choosing money over blood. But the more he raged, the more I realized I had made the right decision. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I never responded. I couldn't. I had done everything I could for them in the past, more than they ever acknowledged. But this time, they needed to feel the weight of their own actions. It wasn't cruelty, it was justice. Meanwhile, my parents had to start over. My father, who had always been proud of the life he had built, took an early retirement with a reduced pension. He was tired, both physically and emotionally. My mother, who had worked at the credit union for years, was now working part-time as a teller. They rented a small one-bedroom apartment in Madison, the kind with thin walls and a coin-operated laundry in the basement. Truett ended up filing for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, and the foreclosure stayed on his credit for the next decade. He bounced between minimum wage jobs, his life a constant cycle of financial instability, and failed attempts to get ahead. I knew this would be their fate, but I also knew that it was a lesson they needed to learn. For me, everything was different now. I had freedom, I had peace. I had always wanted to help my family, to be the one they could count on, but it was clear now that they would never see me for who I was. They would always see me as the girl they could manipulate, and I couldn't keep allowing that. I no longer needed their approval, their validation, or their love that came with strings attached. I was done being the one who was expected to fix everything. And so, I moved on. My business was flourishing. I focused on what I had built, and for the first time in my life, I allowed myself to enjoy the silence. I surrounded myself with people who believed in me, who supported me for who I was, not for what they could get from me. But there was still one thing left to do. I changed my phone number. I forwarded all my mail to a private box. And I erased every trace of my address from the internet. Lakeland was the only one who still reached out, and that was just for the occasional holiday check-in. She was the only one who had always supported me without any hidden agenda. The rest of my family, they would never reach me again. When someone treats you like a tool, a machine, or an ATM, the kindest thing you can do is walk away. Let them feel the consequences of their actions. Let them learn what happens when the machine finally says insufficient funds. Sometimes, the most empowering thing you can do for yourself is to set boundaries that they will finally respect. And when you do, you'll find that the silence that follows is the sweetest sound you've ever heard.